The left keeps proving time and time again that they have all the wrong priorities. And there's no greater example than Worcester, Massachusetts, where the city council just declared itself a sanctuary city, not for struggling businesses, not for law-abiding citizens, but for transgender residents. That's right, folks. While regular people are worried about paying rent or keeping their neighborhood safe, Worcester's leaders are busy passing a resolution that changes nothing except their own self-congratulatory talking points. Because why fix real problems when you can posture on blue sky? And let's not forget the irony here. This sanctuary status is a direct response to Donald Trump's recent executive orders, including a crackdown on transient kids. The left swears up and down that they don't support transitioning minors, yet they're suing to stop any attempt to ban it, protesting outside NYU's hospital to keep it going, and now declaring entire cities as sanctuaries to make sure it never stops. So which is it? Either they're lying about their intentions or they're just that committed to pushing this insanity no matter the cost. Meanwhile, the only real consequence of Worcester's little stunt will be a potential loss of federal funding, because nothing screams progress like bankrupting your own city for the sake of ensuring minors can get pumped full of cross-sex hormones. But hey, the activists got their moment in the spotlight, and the media gets to fawn over yet another meaningless political stunt. So let's take a look at the clips.
It was standing room only at Tuesday's Worcester City Council meeting as about 200 residents joined the discussion over making Worcester a sanctuary city for those who identify as transgender or gender diverse. Local organization Queer Residents of Worcester and our allies filed the petition asking the city to make the designation, pledging to not cooperate with federal and state policies aimed at harming transgender and gender diverse people, as well as ensuring that the LGBTQ+ community has access to healthcare, housing, education, and employment without fear of discrimination.
Right now, trans folks are under attack at the federal level, and we need to reaffirm our commitment to our trans community explicitly. It can't be wrapped in a "we care about everyone here."
This campaign comes on the heels of the first openly non-binary member elected to the council, Worcester City Councilor at Large Thu Nguyen, taking a hiatus from the council after they say the environment was transphobic.
It is your responsibility to stand up and fight for our people, for your people, for the people.
This is a democratic process, and I'm not going to be bullied or intimidated.
City councilors Morris Bergman and Donna Calorio were the two dissenting votes in a 9-2 vote in favor of it. They say they're concerned, like with the sanctuary city designation for immigration, it could lead to a loss of funding.
There's no new rights that this resolution gives that don't already exist. However, there's the potential for federal dollars to be taken away from the city of Worcester.
Worcester is not alone. A similar resolution passed in Northampton, Mass, as well as other cities around the country.
Worcester is so committed to wokeness that it's now officially declared itself a sanctuary for transgender residents, because apparently Worcester is a Saigon of the culture war, and gender activists are the noble refugees fleeing federal oppression. And what exactly are they seeking refuge from? Laws that stop doctors from chemically castrating minors. That's the big human rights crisis of our time, folks. Forget crime, the economy, or schools that can't teach kids to read. No, the real emergency is making sure 14-year-olds can get testosterone faster than they can buy a pack of cigarettes. Now let's break this down. The resolution's supporters claim it's about resisting state and federal policies aimed at harming transgender people. That's an interesting way of saying Trump signed executive orders protecting children from irreversible medical procedures. One of these orders, which has already been challenged by activist judges, blocks federal funding to institutions that provide puberty blockers and hormone therapy to minors, citing long-term harm and lack of sufficient research, according to the executive order on strengthening child safeguards. And the left's reaction? A full-blown meltdown. Funny how they insist they aren't pushing these treatments on kids, yet the second someone tries to stop it, they mobilize like their very lives depend on it. It's like if you told someone they can't sell drugs to minors, and instead of saying, oh, of course not, they immediately sued for the right to keep doing it. And let's talk about the science. A major study from Sweden, the very country that pioneered so-called gender-affirming care, found that post-transition individuals had a suicide rate 19 times higher than the general population, even after undergoing full medical transition, as documented in a study by Dejny et al. +1. That's not a typo. That's 19 times higher. Finland, once a leader in these procedures, has now placed strict restrictions on youth gender treatments, citing a lack of high-quality evidence supporting their benefits, according to the Finnish Health Authority. The UK's NHS has shut down its Tavistock Gender Clinic after an independent review found that its rushed approach harmed children, as detailed in the Cass review. But sure, Worcester knows better than all of these countries. Maybe they should put up a sign, "Welcome to Worcester, smarter than Sweden, more progressive than London, and probably bankrupt by next Tuesday." And let's not overlook the sheer theatricality of this so-called sanctuary status. The city council is proudly pledging to not cooperate with laws that don't even target trans people in the first place. What does that actually mean? That Worcester's Public Works Department will refuse to enforce federal policies on gender ideology? The City Hall employees will throw themselves in front of the FBI if they come looking for someone pushing puberty blockers? Maybe they'll start a new underground railroad, smuggling kids across state lines to get their first dose of estrogen. This is virtue signaling at its finest. An empty, symbolic resolution designed to generate headlines, not actual policy. Then there's the financial side of the circus. 2 council members had the audacity to point out that, much like the disastrous sanctuary city policies for illegal immigration, Worcester could be kissing federal funding goodbye. And they're right. This isn't some theoretical what if. When Chicago declared itself a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants, it lost nearly $7 million in federal funding enforcement grants, according to the Department of Justice. New York's sanctuary policies have cost the city millions in lost federal aid while crime skyrockets, as detailed in the New York City Comptroller report. Worcester, with its $5.4 million in federal funding for various municipal projects, according to the City of Worcester's budget report, is now risking those funds over a symbolic stunt. But instead of engaging in a rational discussion, activists did what they do best, claimed that opposing them is violence. Silence is violent, because nothing says democratic process like forcing taxpayers to fund your latest ideological crusade under the threat of public shaming. At this rate, Worcester will be holding a candlelight vigil for victims of pronoun misuse by the end of the month. And the cherry on top, this whole push was supposedly inspired by the city's first non-binary council member taking a hiatus because they felt oppressed. Let me get this straight. A person runs for office, wins, gets a taxpayer-funded seat of power, and then quits because it turns out politics isn't a safe space? If the Founding Fathers took this approach, we'd still be paying taxes to the British. A Pew Research study in 2023 found that non-binary individuals in political positions actually face less hostility than their opponents claim, with 72% of reported discrimination claims coming from perceived microaggressions rather than direct threats. Now here's the truth, if you can't handle the heat, don't run for office, especially when you actively frame every disagreement as an attack on your identity. If getting misgendered is the worst thing to ever happen to you, congratulations! You're actually doing great. And just so we're clear on what sanctuary actually means in this context, let's roll back a few days to the outside of NYU Hospital, where activists were literally protesting for continued medical transitioning of kids. The same crowd that swears this isn't happening is now marching in the streets to defend it. According to a 2024 report by the American Medical Association, over 95% of lawsuits regarding youth transition procedures are being pushed by activist groups, not medical professionals. They say it's about healthcare, but conveniently leave out that every country outside the US that once championed this ideology is now walking it back. Again, Sweden, Finland, and the UK are pulling the plug on youth gender treatments, but don't worry, some college dropout with he/they in their bio on Twitter is here to tell you that it's totally safe and necessary. The left keeps proving time and time again that they have all the wrong priorities. Instead of addressing crime, inflation, or the fact that their cities are falling apart, they're busy crafting symbolic protections for people who already have every legal right they claim to be fighting for. The only thing Worcester City Council accomplished here was boosting their own progressive credentials at the expense of taxpayers. And when the bill comes due, don't be surprised when they turn around and demand federal handouts to fix the mess they created. Maybe next time, Worcester can declare itself a sanctuary city for common sense. Lord knows they need it. Anyway, folks, all that being said, let's look at some of the testimonies from that City Hall meeting.
I need the the city to protect me because the federal government won't. And if you think you're afraid of Trump, you should see how afraid of Trump I am.
Can you wrap up, please?
Yes, I can. If you say that you're afraid of Trump and that's why you don't want the city to be a safe space for trans people, you better prepare for trans people to make this a very unsafe space.
I'm shaking right now. I don't want to be here. I'm sorry, am I taking too long pleading for my life?
You remembered how many children I have and that 2 of them are trans.
I speak as both the B and the T in the LGBT.
I'm multiply disabled. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder that causes me immense physical pain. I'm on the autism spectrum, and I have narcolepsy, and I couldn't drive myself here, so I had to hide from my driver that I was in drag, which is not an easy thing to do in drag.
I do not want to be here. It's my day off. I do not want to be in your DMs. I do not want to be in your email inboxes. I do not want my creativity writing diss tracks like Kendrick. I don't want to spend an hour applying glitter on my face so that you will hear and see me. I want you to listen to me.
Let us remember that the Nazis burned the books the Nazis burned books on gender sciences first. Now the administration has villainized and marginalized migrant workers, trans, LGBT people, and even special needs, denying life-saving and affirming care.
Can you look at me and tell me how many of my friends need to die before you do anything?
Please wrap up.
Look at me!
Okay, we're all done here.
Fucking pathetic!
We're all done. Come on.
These people are objectively retarded because nothing screams rational policy discussion like showing up to a city council meeting and threatening to make a city unsafe if you don't get your way. Bold strategy. Usually, people try to convince the public they're the real victims. They don't simultaneously imply they'll start rioting if their demands aren't met. But hey, logic isn't exactly the strong suit of the activist class these days. Let's start with a claim from one of these activists that the federal government won't protect them. First of all, this isn't 1939 Germany, and no, the government isn't hunting down trans people in the streets no matter how much these activists wish they were starring in their own dystopian drama. The United States already has comprehensive anti-discrimination protections under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, reinforced by the legal precedent Bostock v. Clayton County. You've got protections in employment, housing, and healthcare. What more do you want? A personal security detail, a taxpayer-funded therapy goat to soothe your anxieties? Because I hate to break it to you, but Trump isn't hiding under your bed waiting to steal your estrogen. And speaking of Trump, these activists are so afraid of him that they have to show up to a city council meeting shaking and pleading for their life. I'm sorry, but at some point the theatrics just get embarrassing. If Trump wins, worst case scenario, what's the worst case scenario here? These activists might actually have to get a job instead of demanding the government cater to their every insecurity. The reality is the only thing Trump is cracking down on is the medical transitioning of minors, biological men using women's bathrooms, and biological men also competing with women in sports, which, by the way, the majority of Americans agree should all be illegal. You know why? Because it's common sense. Then we get this brilliant line from one of the activists. They say, if you say that you're afraid of Trump and that's why you don't want the city to be a safe space for trans people, you better prepare for trans people to make this a very unsafe space. Ah, yes, the totally peaceful movement that just threatened retaliation if they don't get their way. Imagine if literally any other group walked into a government meeting and said, if you don't pass this law, we're going to make things really dangerous for you. They'd be labeled extremists, thrown on a watch list, and probably visited by the FBI. But when a trans activist does it, suddenly it's just passionate advocacy. This is why nobody takes them seriously anymore. You can't demand protection while simultaneously issuing threats. That's like robbing a bank and then filing a police report because someone was mean to you on the way out. Then we get an activist doing a performative breakdown, talking about shaking, pleading, listing off every single medical condition as if that somehow makes their argument stronger. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have narcolepsy. I couldn't drive myself here. Okay. And what does that have to do with making Worcester a sanctuary city? Do we have to just start rewriting laws based on who cries the hardest at a city council meeting? Newsflash, your ability to stack disabilities like infinity stones doesn't mean you're entitled to new legislation. And I love the part about how they had to hide from their driver that they were in drag, yet could very easily stand in front of a camera to give their testimony in front of an entire room of people. The dramatics and the hypocrisy are off the charts on this one. Oh, and then we get hit with a grand finale. The Nazis burned books on gender sciences first. Ah yes, the classic, if you disagree with me, you're a Nazi argument. You knew it was coming. It always comes. They always pull this card. Never mind that the books burned by the Nazis covered a range of topics, many of which had nothing to do with gender theory. But why let facts get in the way when you can just scream Hitler and hope nobody questions it? If everything you don't like is Nazi Germany, maybe, just maybe, you don't actually understand what real oppression looks like. And of course, the final act these activists pull off, they say, how many of my friends need to die before you do anything? Ah, yes, the emotional blackmail stage of the performance. Here's the reality. Suicide is a complex issue, and studies have shown that mental health struggles within the trans community do not magically disappear with medical transition. Again, there's a long track record of countries like Sweden finding that even after full medical transition, trans individuals had a suicide rate 19 times higher than the general population. You know what that means? The issue isn't about denying life-saving care. It's about the fact that underlying mental health problems aren't being addressed. But instead of actually tackling that issue, activists demand we throw money and resources into performative politics that do absolutely nothing to help. And let's not forget how that broad range of testimony ended. After all the crying, shaking, Nazi comparisons, suicide, guilt tripping, and threats, we get the very last thing being an activist cursing out the entire city council. So this is where they decide to bring out the tough guy act. This is why nobody buys the I'm so scared routine anymore. You just got done having a full-scale emotional breakdown and then flipped the switch to smug and dismissive the second you were done. It's almost like you were acting the whole time. So here's the real problem. All of these testimonies are pure rhetoric, zero substance, no actual policy argument, no reasoning for why Worcester needed to be a sanctuary city, just a list of personal grievances, a tearful performance, and threats if they don't get their way. This wasn't an argument. It was an unhinged TED Talk with glitter. And the worst part, the city council caved. Because that's how modern politics works. Whoever screams the loudest gets what they want, while taxpayers are forced to foot the bill. But let's be real, this isn't about safety, it's about control. It's about forcing the government to rubber stamp an ideology, not because it makes sense, but because activists have figured out that emotional blackmail works. And until people start calling it out, the circus will keep rolling from one city to the next. Now, all that being said, perhaps the most shocking testimony to come out of City Hall that day, one that absolutely proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that part of the issue for trans rights is transing kids, is when a child came up with their parent to give a testimony.
Noticing people here are trying to control the rights of others, and that's not right. We should make Worcester a sanctuary city for trans people. Everybody deserves to feel safe, and everybody needs to feel safe. I've lived here for 4 years, and there hasn't really been any changes in how people feel safe in the city. My birthday is this Saturday, and all I want is peace and for you to vote yes. Please don't let me down for my birthday. There's a lot of queer people that I love, and to Candy Carlson, you should know to never call someone I'm 7 and I know better. The kids are watching and we're ready to vote you out.
Wow. These radical trans activists had to get a 7-year-old to be their spokesperson. That's right, folks. The adults have officially tapped out. They've run out of arguments, so now they're sending in the toddlers. I gotta be honest, I was half expecting this kid to hold up a crayon-drawn protest sign that says, trans rights or no recess, because nothing says serious policy discussion like a second grader guilt-tripping politicians about sanctuary city status in between bites of their Lunchables. Now, first off, let's address the obvious. A child has no business testifying about complex political policies. This kid is barely old enough to tie their shoes without adult supervision, but somehow we're supposed to believe they've developed an independent, well-researched opinion on federal gender policies. What we actually have here is pure manipulation. This is like the political version of when your mom says, if you don't eat your vegetables, Santa's not coming. They know if they put a kid up there, no one will dare push back, because who wants to be a mean adult arguing with a child? It's the same playbook every time. Hide behind kids, cry if anyone questions it, and pretend disagreement equals genocide. Then we get this absolute banger. Noticing people here are trying to control the rights of others, and that's not right. Ah, yes. The freedom argument. The one that falls apart faster than a cheap IKEA bookshelf the second you actually examine it. No one is controlling anyone's rights. Adults can still identify however they want, wear whatever they want, and change their names to Moonbeam Starshine if that makes them feel special. What's actually happening is that lawmakers are saying maybe we shouldn't be handing out puberty blockers to kids like they're Flintstone vitamins. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but we have clear examples. Sweden, Finland, and the UK. They all put the brakes on these treatments after discovering that, shocker, sterilizing children and wrecking their bone density might not be a great idea for their long-term health. But sure, let's pretend Worcester knows better than decades of medical research. And just when you think it couldn't get any more ridiculous, we get hit with the emotional blackmail phase. My birthday is this Saturday, and all I want is peace and for you to vote yes. Now we're using birthday wishes as political leverage. What's next? Holding a Make-A-Wish press conference? Council members, this dying puppy just wants the trans sanctuary status for Worcester. Do it before Sparky, unfortunately, passes away. If this is how we're making policy decisions now, I demand that my birthday wish be legally binding. I want a tax refund and a free steak. Make it happen, Worcester. And the cherry on top, the tiny political operative finishes with a threat. The kids are watching, and we're gonna vote you out. Oh my gosh. First off, you're 7, buddy. The only thing you're voting on is which Paw Patrol character is the best. Second, imagine the level of delusion it takes to believe this was an organic thought from a child and not something their activist parents drilled into their brain. This isn't civic engagement. This is indoctrination. It's straight up cult behavior. If you have to brainwash a 7-year-old to argue your case, maybe your case isn't that strong to begin with. And this is the same movement that swears they don't want to transition kids. You don't want to involve children in this, yet here you are, dragging them to political meetings, shoving scripted talking points into their hands, and teaching them to use their birthday as emotional extortion. This is not a kid making an informed decision. This is a walking, talking activist sock puppet. And what's even funnier, the second they're done, the adults in the room applaud. Like this is some profound moment in history. No, this wasn't a Martin Luther King Jr. speech. It was a rehearsed monologue fed to a child who barely understands what they're even saying. So here's the bottom line. This testimony wasn't about logic. It wasn't about policy. It was pure manipulation. A cheap stunt to force the council's hand by putting them in an impossible situation. Either they cave to activist demands or they risk being labeled monsters for disagreeing with a child. But newsflash, just because you throw a 7-year-old on stage doesn't mean you win the argument. If anything, it proves you've already lost it. At what point do we stop letting emotional blackmail replace rational debate? How many times will we watch activists parade children around like props, demanding we surrender to their ideology under the guise of compassion? This isn't about safety, rights, or inclusion. It's about control. It's about a movement that has abandoned persuasion in favor of coercion, using fear, guilt, and spectacle to silence opposition. And if a cause is so weak that it requires 7-year-olds to carry its message, doesn't that tell you everything you need to know? The real question isn't why Worcester caved to this charade. It's whether the rest of us will keep pretending any of this is normal. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.